We're very pleased to have Susan Shelley. She's a columnist and on the editorial board with the LA Daily News Group. They own LA Daily News, Orange County Register, Press Enterprise, San Marino Sun, Redlands Daily Facts, and other newspapers. And she has a book that How Trump Won, and she's also now a vice president for communications with the Howard Jarvis Taxpayers Assn. And aside from being charming and cute, and she has a very keen knowledge of California politics, so we're just so pleased that she's joined us here tonight to tell us what she thinks about what our prospects are here in California. Susan.
Well, it is so nice to be here, and what a great turnout. You didn't all come to see me, did you? No. Wow. Well, thank you. Well, in return for such a lovely welcome, I'm only going to give you good news today. Only good news. 7 o'clock this morning, I was on a conference call with the people who are trying to keep the gas tax where it is, trying to defeat Proposition 6. Proposition 6, we want to vote yes to repeal the gas tax. That's the initiative, yes on Proposition 6. Well, I was on the phone with the San Luis Obispo Council of Governments and the League of Cities. They sent representatives because one of the Chamber of Commerce groups wanted to do one of these fair presentations. So they had two on that side, and then they had me on the other side. And let me give you some good news. They've got nothing. They've got nothing to convince the voters. This was what they said. This is what the guy from the League of Cities said. The Democrats are never going to go near this issue again. They were so terrified, they were so frightened by the Josh Newman recall. Because that's not supposed to happen. They're supposed to be able to vote to increase your taxes all the time, over and over, and you're never supposed to be able to do anything about it. Well, guess what? We're going to do something about the gas tax on November 6th. Yes, on Proposition 6. If you don't do anything else, tell your neighbors, tell your friends that they are currently paying, in a family of 4, something like $750 more than they should be, just because of that tax. About $400 of it is a direct cost of gasoline and car registration, which was increased. If you've gotten your car registration, you see how high. It's brutal. Gray Davis was recalled over that too, you know, over raising the car registration. Californians just don't care for that. And when we see the extra $400 for the direct cost of gasoline, that's only a fraction of what this is really costing you. And the reason is because SB 1 also increased the cost of diesel, 20 cents a gallon. Everything moved by truck is more expensive in California because of that bill, because of SB 1. Now, the guy from the Council of Governments talked about how all the boards of supervisors involved in the Council of Governments were all in favor of this because there'd be all this money coming in. And they described how it was going to be $52 billion over 10 years. It was $5 billion. It was going to be $175 million a year, and $3 million more there, and something else. And how great it would be. It was like Christmas morning for him. He was so excited that all this money was coming in. And then they turned the microphone to me, and I said, well, it's great if it falls from the sky. But it doesn't fall from the sky. It comes out of the wallets of people who are working and struggling to pay their bills. Do you know what the poverty rate is in San Luis Obispo County? 18.5%. Do you know what it is in Santa Barbara County? 23%. That's because the cost of living is high in California, and when you take into account the high cost of living, we have the highest poverty rate in the United States of America, in the Golden State. And it's government policy that is doing this to us. And SB 1 is just one example of it. Very direct, 12 cents a gallon on gasoline, 20 cents a gallon on diesel, another $100 to register your car. And they're just celebrating, they've got the champagne open, they've got money coming in. No more of this. So the League of Cities guy was telling the Chamber of Commerce, if you don't get this, the Democrats will never touch it again. They're so frightened by the Josh Newman recall. And there's a Republican who voted for this who's getting death threats, and they're very upset about that up in Sacramento. And they didn't seem to register that what these two things together represent is that people can't pay any more to the government. We're tapped out. We're done. And every single day in California, another tax, another fee, another proposal for a higher something. It's very wearing. And it's not just taxes. You're seeing it on your utility bills. Water rates are going up. Electricity rates are going up. Why? Because of policy choices that Sacramento has made. And this can be stopped, because there's no really good reason for it. Most of it is coming out of some of these idiotic climate laws that were passed in 2006 and 2008. For instance, we're trying to get to 40% below 1990 levels of greenhouse gases, as if we knew what those were, and as if we could figure out when we were there. But we've got bureaucrats making six-figure salaries, sitting at desks, figuring out who has to cut back on greenhouse gases and who has to pay a penalty to the state. And when you pay the state for a permit to emit greenhouse gases, guess where 25% of the money goes? The bullet train. The bullet train. Why? Because the voters, when we approved the bullet train idea, $9 billion of bonds, one of the things we put in there, because we're not fools, one of the things we put in there is it cannot be funded with a tax increase. No tax increase, it must not need a subsidy. We're very savvy, we California voters. We're not letting these politicians do anything to us. We're seeing this stuff and we're gonna stop it. Good luck to us. They are so clever. They invent this cap and trade system, which forces companies who run an engine to pay these fees, and then they take 25% of the money from the fee, and they spend it on the bullet train, and they get a court to say it's not a tax. Go figure, you have to pay it if you're going to be in business, and the government collects it, and the government figures out how to spend it, and it's not a tax. The court said it's not a tax because it's not mandatory. If a business doesn't want to pay it, they can just stop their operations. Blithering idiocy. This is blithering idiocy. It is making your electricity costs 60% higher than the national average. Did you know that? It was 30%, then it was 50%, now it's 60% higher because of these idiotic, blithering, idiotic policies of trying to shut down gas generators and trying to shut down coal generators and trying to make the whole state of California run with sunshine and wind, like a Rembrandt painting. It's not going to happen. The sun, no one seems to know in Sacramento, goes down. You learn something every day. Call your assembly member and remind them that the sun goes down, and then all the power from solar energy, which peaked at 12 o'clock noon, is gone when all the people come home from work and start turning on their air conditioning, their television sets, and their electric ranges. And then we have like the maximum power peak draw is at 5 o'clock, and solar has tanked. So what do you need? You need gas generators. And it takes money to keep gas generators going, right? So somebody's got to pay it. So even if you put solar panels on your house because someone told you, wow, this is a great way to save money, you're going to see that extra fees and charges are creeping in there from the utility companies because they've got to pay for these gas generators. But the politicians are sometimes shutting off the gas generators because they think we don't need it. We don't need that capacity because we're going to 50% solar. We're going renewable. Okay, we're going renewable. And then one hot day and the power is going out all over California. Why? Because they shut off the gas generators and they cut off the coal generators. And they're trying to live on this very narrow band of renewable energy. And when they planned this all out through the last 10 years, if you look closely at their documents, somewhere in there the math doesn't quite work and they say, well, this is where conservation makes up the difference. Really? So what they're saying is there isn't enough electricity. They are actually creating policies where there is not enough electricity. Now, we could repeal these laws. If we had sensible government in Sacramento, we could repeal these laws. And do you know what would happen to the planet Earth if we did this? Nothing. Nothing would happen to the planet Earth, because for all that they talk about climate science, 98% this and 100% that, you will not find not one climate scientist who says that what California is doing is having any effect whatsoever. We are 1% of global greenhouse gas emissions. So even if it's all true that greenhouse gas emissions cause global warming, and global warming is going to be a catastrophe, and we're all going to die from it, it doesn't matter, because we could shut down the whole state. The whole state. We could turn off every engine, we could park every car, we could shoot every cow. It makes no difference. It doesn't do anything. So get your favorite politician, pin them to a wall and say, this isn't doing anything. You know what they'll say? Well, we know that, but California must show leadership. Leadership. Nobody's following. Nobody wants 60% higher electricity rates than the national average, and $1 a gallon more for gasoline even before the tax increase. Nobody wants the highest poverty rate in the nation. Nobody wants this. And this is just one example of blithering idiocy. The water policies are beginning to cross into another dimension, as Rod Serling would say, of idiocy. It's beyond idiocy what they're doing with water. Recently, the governor signed 2 bills that are going to restrict people to 55 gallons of water per person per day. Now, how do they propose to do that? They're going to hold the water districts accountable for the amount of water that their customers use. Well, how's that going to work? The only way to do that is to raise your bills. And that, ladies and gentlemen, is the game. All they want to do is raise your bills. Because maybe they've got a 9 or 10% utility tax on those bills. Every time your bill goes up, their revenue comes in. And every time they create this sense of crisis, that there's a drought, and we're in a desert, and there's never going to be enough water, and we're all going to die, you get that bill, you open it up, you go, ah! Well, I guess I don't have any choice, I have to pay it. We're in a crisis. And we're always in that same crisis, and it never gets better. Well, let me tell you the good news. I promise you good news. There's more than enough water in California. We have policies from unelected regulators appointed by the governor. They are creating allocation plans for water. They're allocating it into the ocean. I think I'm making this up. There's a new plan and there's another one coming. They are allocating water from rivers, which could go into reservoirs, which could go into aqueducts, which could go to farms. They are allocating it out to the ocean in the name of protecting fish. In the 1980s, let me give you just a little history of water projects in California. Water projects in California are one of the wonders of the world, engineering marvels. In the 1930s, they literally said they were moving the rain. Because in California, it's always been the case that you get most of the rain in the northern third. You use most of the water because the arable land is in the southern 2/3. They literally moved the rain. They created the Central Valley Project to pump water from the Delta to the Central Valley farms, and they created a breadbasket that could feed the world. In the 1960s, the state of California paid for, and you are still paying for, by the way, even though it was built in the 1960s, it's still on your property tax bill, the State Water Project. This is another set of massive pumps right next to, at the south end of the Delta, right next to the federal project. This is the state project. And in the 1980s, about 20 years after the State Water Project was built, in the 1980s, we were exporting this volume of water, 8 million acre feet a year. Now remember that number, 8 million. Doesn't really matter how much water that is, but that's what was being pumped from the Delta south. Do you know what it is today? Less than 4 million acre feet. Why? Because in the 1970s, a federal and state Endangered Species Act was passed. And then the lawsuits started. And because of the way the laws were written and interpreted, and the way the settlements of the lawsuits were negotiated, and the way the litigation, the legislation to enforce the litigation was written, they have gradually put biologists in charge of deciding who lives and who dies in California. So if the fish are spawning and they turn off the pumps and that causes the farmers to lose water at a critical moment, too bad. Too bad, no recourse. Now, one of the great things that in my job as a member of the editorial board of the Southern California News Group is that I get to ask politicians questions, especially in election years when they want an endorsement or when they want us to support something they're doing. They'll come in and talk to us. Senator Dianne Feinstein came in to talk to us, and I was really looking forward to it. I went out of my way to be there because she's blocking a bill that would change the interpretation of the Endangered Species Act so the pumps could be turned back on. And she's blocking it. And then Kamala Harris, who was more recently elected, she's blocking it. I wanted to know why. This is a bill that has passed the House. It's sitting in the Senate. It's by David Valadao from Bakersfield, I think. I forget the number of the bill. But it would reinterpret these laws or change the wording so that we could turn the pumps back on and have water for the cities and water for the farms. And she's blocking it. And I asked her why she's blocking it, and this was her answer. I don't know why we've taken that position. I'll have to ask my staff. Now, I want to emphasize that this was not an age-related issue. She's just fine. This was just a woman on autopilot. This was a politician who had just been going along with a particular group of supporters who were in the environmentalist community. This is how they do it. This is who they listen to. This is what they sign on to. And she didn't even know that the bill had passed the House and was in the Senate. She said it wasn't. And it was. And I didn't want to correct her because, you know, she's Dianne Feinstein and what's the point? But I'm here to tell you that these policies are man-made damage to California, and it can all be fixed. It can all be fixed. We can turn the water back on. We can stop this nonsense with turning off electricity. We can stop the ridiculous housing policy, ridiculous blithering idiocy of California's housing policy, which essentially prevents private enterprise from building homes that people want to buy. What we do is we say we don't want to have sprawl, because sprawl, Al Gore tells us, so we know it's true, sprawl is bad for the climate. So in 2008, we passed something called the Sustainable Communities Act, which in essence bans outlying housing as causing too many vehicle miles traveled. We don't want driving going on, because driving is bad. Driving is bad for the planet, unless it's an electric car. So what this bill encourages is extreme density along rail lines and in infill areas. And infill areas where something else had been built, but it was demolished, and now you can build housing on it. Well, the trouble with this is it creates all this neighborhood friction, because people don't want to live on top of each other. People want a yard for the dog, for the kids. And except in rare circumstances where you're like in college and dorm life is fun, most people don't want to live in an apartment next to the train tracks. That's not the American dream for any generation. People want a little bit of elbow room. And when you don't give them elbow room, they're on each other's nerves. And you have social unrest. And we're seeing that in California. We're seeing social unrest. We're seeing people at each other's throats when we could just all get along. But we're not getting along. What we have is the politics of shortage. And the politics of shortage is like a game of musical chairs with knives. That's how we're living in California. We shouldn't have shortages. This is all man-made damage. So we start in rooms like this, working together to elect better people. We need better people in government. We need better policies, and we need better people. And the other thing we can do, we have the initiative in California, that can be very helpful. Proposition 6 is the right thing to do. Now let me give you an example of one that's not the right thing to do. Proposition 10. Vote no on Proposition 10. Here's what Proposition 10 does. This would allow every city in California to enact the most stringent rent control they can think of. Now, what's wrong with rent control? What's wrong with rent control is, imagine that you're in the business of rental housing, and it's a business. Whether you have 4 units that you rent out, you live in one and you rent 3 for income, or whether you own towers of apartments, rental housing is a business. And it has a lot of overhead. It has usually loans attached, long-term loans. So in a business, you have to know how much money you're going to bring in and how much money you're going to spend, and you put it on a piece of paper, and you get a loan, and the bank approves it, everything's fine, going along, everybody's happy. And then the city that you're in decides to pass a rent control ordinance. And now the rents in your building are never going to be able to go up to cover the costs of running the building. How much can you sell your building for now? Not so much, maybe not as much as you paid for it. If you take rent control out of the equation and you ban new rent control ordinances, now how much is your building worth? Now it's worth a lot. Now you can build housing. So we still have all these other policy issues where we're not building housing, and the CEQA problems and all the rest of it with lawsuits. Lots of reasons that there isn't enough housing being built in California. But rent control isn't one of them, because new buildings can't be under rent control. That's what the law passed in the 1990s said, the Costa-Hawkins Rental Housing Act. Proposition 10 repeals the Costa-Hawkins Act, and it would allow any city to pass rent control even on your house. If you want to rent your house, and you put tenants in your house and you go live somewhere else, you can't raise their rent. A city could put your house under rent control. If you've converted your garage and it's an apartment and you're renting it to a college student, that college student can stay there until the age of 80. And you won't be able to raise the rent beyond what the bureaucracy allows you to, 2%, 3% a year, whatever they deign to allow you to pass through. This is a terrible threat to property owners, and it will cause a housing catastrophe. Not just a crisis, a catastrophe. Because why would anyone invest in a business like that? So if there's not enough housing being built as it is, why don't we just pull the plug on the state with Proposition 10? So vote no on Proposition 10. Rent control is a threat to California, is a threat to property owners. It only helps that narrow band of people who win the lottery in the apartment they want to stay in for the rest of their lives. At the moment that it passes, they benefit, and everybody else is in trouble. Question? Right. The affordable housing something. Yeah. That's right, you'll have to pay to move them. This is so true. The wording, and let's talk about how they word these tax increases, shall we? Now, everything on the ballot is for something wonderful. Why is that? They take the highest priority issues and they come to the voters for more money, either debt or taxes. Let's go through the ballot, shall we? First of all, let me give you one more that you do want to vote for, and this is Proposition 5. Proposition 5 expands the portability of the Proposition 13 tax break. So if you're in a house that you've been in for a long time, and you want to move somewhere else in California, but you don't want to pay property taxes on what houses are selling for now, you will be able to take your base year value to your new property. Now, you can do that currently under the law, but only in the county in which you already reside, or like 10 or 11 counties that accept the transfers. This would allow you to take it to anywhere in California. And instead of being limited to just once in your lifetime, you could do it over and over, and you could do it in a property that's a different price. Currently, you can only do it for a property that's the same or less, but this way, if you found a house that was a little more, you wouldn't lose the benefit. So that's Proposition 5. It expands the portability of Prop 13. That's a good one. Nothing wrong with that. Let's talk about the bonds that are on the ballot. We have Prop 1, Prop 2, Prop 3, Prop 4. These are bonds. The first one is called affordable housing. It's $4 billion. It's $3 billion on the taxpayers, and then it's $1 billion for veterans housing, because you have to put a candy shell over this $3 billion spending or no one's going to vote for it. So it says veterans housing in big letters, and there is $1 billion of veterans loans in there, and the veterans pay those back on their houses, so that's not on the taxpayers. It's a $3 billion housing bill, Proposition 1. Is there a question over there? Can't see it.
Let's let her finish her presentation, then we'll have time for questions.
Okay, let's plow through these. That's Proposition 1, $3 billion, actually four, for affordable housing. Proposition 2 is a $2 billion housing bond. It's called the Safe at Home or Go Home or something with home in it. Home must pull very well for these things. It's $2 billion, and it's paid back not from the taxpayers, but from the millionaire's tax of Prop 63. Do you remember, I think this was in 2004, California passed a 1% surcharge on income of $1 million. And the money was supposed to be used to fund mental health services, because it's nothing new that we have people living on the streets and having problems, substance abuse, mental health issues. It's nothing new, and the voters have wanted to address this before. But California did not spend the money on it. And now they want to use the money for housing for the homeless. Why? Because then they can award housing construction contracts to their friends and build it at twice the price that the private sector would build it. Proposition 2 allows the money from the millionaire's tax to pay off this $2 billion bond for housing for the homeless mentally ill. That's Prop 2. Prop 3 is $8.8 billion for, ready? Water. Water, because they've turned it off and they know you need it. And they know you'll vote for it if they put water on the ballot line. We just passed in June, was it 4, was it 5? How much? $4 billion for water in June, and there was another one before that, and this is $8.8 billion for water. You know, they keep telling us that the budget has a surplus. And yet, every time they need 10 cents, they come to us. Why is this? It's because California doesn't really have a surplus. We're drowning in debt. No pun intended on the water bonds. We are drowning in debt. According to the Hoover Institution, $769 billion with a B, $769 billion is what we owe to public employees for pensions that we don't have the money to pay. It's $60,000 per household. And you're not going to get the bill for that, because they're going to use the money that you're already paying in taxes to pay those pension obligations. They have to pay the pension obligations. They have to pay the bondholders, and they have to pay the pension obligations. And then they run out of money for everything else. And that's when they try to think of a way to raise taxes. And that's why you see water bonds on your ballot, and why you see water taxes and every other kind of wonderful thing that no one could possibly vote against. It's all very poll tested. It's quite scientific. Proposition 4, you ready? You want to take a guess? Children's hospitals. I dare you. Vote against it. Now, they could spend $1.5 billion, which is what this bond is, from the Treasury, from the general fund, for the very important purpose of equipping and renovating children's hospitals. Who would oppose that? Who would vote against that in Sacramento? Oh, no. They don't want to use their money. They want to use new money for this. Well, the trouble with bonds is everything you do with borrowed money costs twice as much. If you've ever tried to pay for anything on a credit card over a long period of time, you know that. That's what bonds are. So it may be an $8 billion bond, but it's a $16 billion bill. It winds up coming out of future spending ahead of police, fire, everything else that the state or the counties or the cities want to do. The bonds have to be paid first, and the interest is very expensive. And if interest rates go up later, as they're likely to, it will be even more expensive. 4 bond measures, 1, 2, 3, 4. You can decide what you want to do with it. The Howard Jarvis Taxpayers Association is not taking a position on these because they are important priorities. We think they should have been funded from the general fund, but they weren't. So now it's in the hands of the voters, and the voters will decide. And that's the way we think it should be. Now let's move on to the comedy portion of the ballot. Do you want daylight savings time to be permanent? It doesn't really matter whether you do or not, because this is purely advisory. It doesn't take effect. We could vote for it, but it doesn't take effect unless Congress allows us to do it. I don't know that they would. I don't know that they wouldn't. But voting for Proposition 7, which makes daylight savings time permanent, doesn't really do anything. So flip a coin, doesn't matter. Proposition 8 is very dangerous. Proposition 8 is price controls on kidney dialysis clinics. It limits what they can charge, and it forces them to account for everything they spend and everything they earn to a panel of appointed government regulators. Price controls cause shortages everywhere, all the time, 100%. Price controls cause shortages. We do not want a shortage of dialysis clinics. This would be very, very dangerous. And this has to do with unions wanting leverage, and that's why this is on the ballot. Vote no on 8, in my opinion. 11 would require private ambulance workers to keep their beepers on, to keep their cell phones on, to remain on call when they're on their meal and rest breaks. This is a reaction to some sort of a court decision that said maybe they don't. So by putting this on the ballot and saying yes, they have to remain on call, and if something happens and there's a law that says they can't remain on call because that's a workplace violation, then this ballot measure would protect the companies from being sued or chased down by the government over that. This is another example of they make a problem and then they have to try to fix the problem, and then the fix is a problem, but then they have to fix the fix of the problem. And we have too many rules in California about workplaces, and it's very difficult and expensive to hire people, and it's very costly for insurance, and that's why. And number 12, possibly the most comic of all of them, we're here in this fine barbecue restaurant. I don't even know what would happen to the prices of this place if this passes. But this would establish minimum standards for the amount of space in the crate of a farm animal being raised for food. I don't know. We passed something a few years ago that said they had to have humane conditions, and now apparently that wasn't enough for the animal rights activists. They want to specify the square footage. So that's what this would do. And beyond that, it would cause all the non-complying products, eggs, pork, whatever is non-complying with this standard, to be illegal to sell in California. And it would set up a regulatory bureaucracy to write the regulations and enforce them. That's going to cost us $10 million by itself. I would say no on 12, but we're in a barbecue restaurant and I don't want to offend the animals. So they're on the walls, they might come down for me. So that's what's on your ballot. Most importantly, yes on 6, no on 10. Yes on 6, no on 10. Yes on 6, no on 10. Thank you very much. Happy to take your questions.
If you have a question, come up here and line up. And I'll start off with the first question. Does John Cox have a chance?
Does John Cox have a chance? You know, I think he does. I might be wrong, but I think he does have a chance, and I'll tell you why he has a chance. First of all, Gavin Newsom is no Jerry Brown. Now, he might get away with ducking debates and ducking interviews and just looking pretty. He might get away with that, but he might not, and he might make a mistake, and it might blow up his campaign. It could happen. It's not impossible. And John Cox could take advantage of that. He's becoming a better candidate. He's a smart guy. He's on the right track of all the economic policies. And I think you can feel in California how dissatisfied people are. They don't necessarily know what to do about it. Mostly what they're doing about it is renting a U-Haul. And then they're not here to vote, so that's a problem too. But I think you can feel the dissatisfaction, and there is an opportunity here. I think we're going to see it in the congressional races. I think we're going to see it possibly in the Senate races, the state Senate races. I think we may see some surprisingly strong Republican numbers. Obviously, we have a long way to go before we win anything, but that doesn't mean we can't get there. You know, in 1994, just before Newt Gingrich took control of the House of Representatives, for the first time in 40 years that Republicans had held gavels, the night before it happened, no one saw it coming. And the news anchors were just agape at the numbers coming in. Oh my goodness, Ann Richards going down in Texas. How can it be? How can it be? People were upset. And they're upset now in California. And what's our government doing about it? They're suing the Trump administration. 4% growth in the second quarter, and the stock market is doing great, and there's more jobs for more people, and wages are going up, and they think they're going to defeat Donald Trump? By being in favor of tax increases and an open border, they think that's going to win? It's not going to win. Don't even worry about it. It's 100% certain Donald Trump gets reelected as long as the fried chicken doesn't kill him. And then Pence would be reelected.
Sam.
So I have a question with regard to Prop 10.
Yes.
Are you seeing in your conversations with people who are landlords who have empty what do you call that? A vacancy? Mm-hmm. Are they holding off until November before renting it out and seeing what happens? Because if I actually rent it out or them out,
right,
I don't want to get stuck.
Right. Well, I don't know. It's possible. What I have heard is that people are buying rental property in other states instead of investing in California, and that the buildings that are already under rent control are selling because that's an investment where it's not going to get any worse. That's their theory. But it could get worse. It could get worse because there's no limit anymore on, for instance, vacancy decontrol. If Costa-Hawkins is repealed, then if a tenant voluntarily moves out, under current law, the landlord can raise the rent to market when the tenant moves out, raise the rent for the next tenant. But a city could pass an ordinance that says you can't do that. They could end that and they could say all your tenants for the rest of time are under that same rent control ordinance, only 2% a year increase. They could do that.
Are you looking for a rental?
Don.
Yeah, I have a question, but just some admin. So Prop 9, was that the one that was removed?
Prop 9, yes. Prop 9 was going to divide California into 3 states.
Okay.
And the Supreme Court of California said, get out of here. And it did, it went out. They decided that it was not an amendment to the Constitution, it was a revision to the Constitution, and that has to go through the legislature, and it can't be an initiative process, and they yanked it.
And then 11, were you recommending yes or no? It was,
Which one was 11?
11 was the private
Oh, 11
ambulance.
was the ambulance. I think it's fine.
Okay.
I think it's okay. I don't think there's an objection to it. It protects the employers from being sued under one of these laws that's wage theft. You know, they can call it wage theft if somebody's required to be on call during a rest break. But with an ambulance worker, it's kind of a different category. So this would prevent that from happening. Nobody's going to get sued for asking ambulance workers to keep their beepers on when they're on a rest break. I think it's okay.
You know, I have a question, but an FYI. I'm working with John Eastman and his group.
Mm-hmm.
There's a chance that the 2013, our group collected 3,000 signatures to repeal the co-ed bathroom law. That could still make the ballot. There's
Really?
a court hearing. Yeah, there's a court hearing in July which could determine that.
So that could wind up on the statewide November ballot?
Yeah, it's possible.
Oh my, I thought the statewide
Very
ballot was
exciting.
set.
So I had a question, a statement. Prop 1, I wear many hats. I'm also the president of the San Bernardino County chapter of GOP Veterans.
Mm-hmm.
So at the state convention, They told us what a turkey Prop 1 was.
Really?
Because it poll tested, originally it was a $3 billion housing bond. And they said they didn't like it, so hey, let's throw veterans into it. And they said that they made it $4 billion, so they used that veterans cover. So
Right.
anybody, it's really kind of insulting what they came up with. We had an economist come in and talk to us. So out of that billion for veterans, it's going to maybe come down to about 200 billion. But it shows you just what fraud they do to throw
So
these candy cover.
cynical.
So my point is, please add Prop 1 to the no on.
To the no list.
Yeah, to the no list.
Okay.
All right, thank you.
No, well, I'm going to vote no on all the bonds personally. I mean, enough already with this.
Janice?
Enough.
Yes, one of the last propositions I voted yes on was housing for veterans. And they took that money and they gave it to Parks and Recreation
Oh.
all over the state for equestrian therapy and, you know, this and that. So I was really upset with that. But I wanted to ask you, it's my understanding that all of the water that is in bottles that goes all over the country comes from California. The Arrowhead and Sparklets have sweetheart deals here in California, and they can just pump that water out with no money being spent or tax on them, and they sell it wherever.
That could be. I'm not familiar with that. I have heard about some sweetheart deals for certain farmers that are being subsidized by Los Angeles ratepayers. Lots of people being subsidized by Los Angeles ratepayers and Southern California ratepayers generally. If this stupid tunnel project goes forward, then everybody who uses the Metropolitan Water District's water in whatever area you live in Southern California, everybody who uses Metropolitan Water District water could see maybe $5 a month extra on their bill for the tunnels. And all of the agricultural districts throughout the rest of the state have decided they don't want to pay for it. So the Metropolitan Water District says, oh, heck, we'll pay for it. We'll just pass it on to our customers in Southern California. They won't mind. We've scared them to death. You know, in Los Angeles, there's going to be a stormwater tax proposal on the November ballot. It's a 2.5 cent it's a parcel tax. It's a new property tax, 2.5 cents per square foot of impermeable surface. Driveways, parking lots, roofs, patios. If it's concrete, you're taxed on it. And 10% of the money is reserved for drought education and workforce training. So that's slush fund and propaganda is what that is. This is so despicable. Everything on the ballot that they come to you, it's, you know, they would say it's for puppies, but possibly the ASPCA has a copyright on that, so they don't say it's for puppies. Children's hospitals, water, veterans. If they told you it was for pensions, you would throw them out of office. If they told you what they were really doing, you would absolutely, it would create this surge of voter turnout like no one's ever seen. If they said you owe $60,000 per household because we wanted to give our state employees more money because they walk precincts for us and donate to our campaigns, and we wanted to pay them back, the way Jerry Brown gave the prison guards a 5% raise this year, a one-year contract with a 5% raise for no good reason, no apparent reason. Even the legislative analyst's office said this is really not necessary for any reason. They're well paid. They're paid more than comparable prison guards. There's no reason that they're going to leave the job. You don't have to retain them. You don't need to pay this. Jerry Brown gave the prison guards a 5% raise, and then that increases, of course, all the percentage contributions for pensions. If they told you that's why they needed the money, there would be a surge of voter turnout that would throw them all out of office. So our job is to tell people who don't know that the policies and the people they think they support are the reason that their bills are so high. We have to tell them why their electric bills are 60% higher than the people who live in the next state, and why they're paying $1 a gallon more for gasoline than anybody in Nevada or even in New York. Even in high-priced states, we're still paying more. You can go on gasbuddy.com, and you can type in any city, and you can see what the average price is, and then type in your city, and Why? No reason.
We are past time, but you do have, before we go, we have one last question here.
Oh,
You have a
wait.
you have
two
a conference
plugs.
coming up.
I have 2 plugs I have to do. How many people here are members of the Howard Jarvis Taxpayers Association? How many people are not? Okay, everybody who's not can get one of these newspapers. John Barry has them. If you're not a member, if you are a member, it's only $15 a year, and you get this 3 times a year. I edit it, I write it. It's very worthwhile information about taxes, and we'll email you about all the stuff that's going on. And the Howard Jarvis Taxpayers Association is having a taxpayer conference at the Ontario Airport Doubletree, September 8th. It's a Saturday morning. Please come. Please come. It's free. Breakfast is free. The conference is free. The parking is free. All you have to do is go to hjta.org, Howard Jarvis Taxpayers Association, hjta.org. Click the little banner for the conference. Register for it. Just RSVP. And we'll see you on September 8th with some great information about taxes, legislation, transportation, Proposition 13, and what's on your ballot in November.
Okay, we have one last question. Make it a good one.
Not necessarily a question, but more of a remark to the water and the cap and trade and how it's affecting our farming.
Yes.
My family and I have been in the cold storage and food processing facility industry for 24 years. Since then, we have had the highest unemployment rate since cap and trade came in. Why? Because government bureaucrats are going to our customers saying, well, we're not 100% sure, but we're guessing you're releasing about X amount of gas into the air, so we're going to charge you a few $1 million in fees or we're shutting you down. Our customers pay that fee, and then they leave California.
That's what's going
And
on.
along with the water that's happening in Central California with this stupid fish, we used to be one of the largest farming industries in the world. We would ship not just nationally, but internationally. And since of this Democrat drought that has caused Central California, it has become a barren wasteland. So just so you understand how big this water bill is and cap and trade.
And how fast it could be fixed with a different governor.
Yeah,
With a
jobs are leaving California by the hundreds of thousands.
But with a different governor, we would have new appointments to these water boards, new appointments to these regulatory boards. Maybe some of these regulatory boards would even be abolished, like the climate people. We don't really need the climate people. It's not helping us. So it can all be fixed. And this is why you can't lose heart. This is why we have to work so hard. This is why, when you're out there fighting socialism, it's a full-time job and then some. Thank you very much.
We have one last question.
Last question.
But it's an easy question.
Yeah, I want to know what's the answer to CalPERS. It seems like a lot of local municipalities are suffering because of the impact of all these unfunded pensions.
Yes.
So what is the answer for that?
Well, the answer is that the pensions have to be funded through growth, because you can't cut a pension that was someone already retired, you can't cut their pension. What you can do, not in California, but in other places, is when people are still working, you can change the deal on their pensions. Now in California, there's something called the California Rule, which is made up out of the air, kind of like the climate agenda. It's just made up, but they abide by it. And what the California Rule says is, you can't change the pensions of an existing workforce, people who are currently working, unless you give them wage increases to compensate for it. So that's what Jerry Brown has been doing. He's been giving wage increases for little tiny adjustments in the pensions. This is in court right now in the California Supreme Court, and if the California Rule is thrown out, then cities will be able to renegotiate the pension deals for the existing workforce. And you know, if state and city and municipal workers don't like it, they can go work someplace else. They don't have to stay. If they say, well, this new pension deal isn't what I had in mind, they can go. But you can create a sustainable model for the future, and then you don't have this unfunding problem because you haven't overpromised. So what they can do right now is nothing. What they can do right now is raise your taxes, and that's what they're doing. You're seeing taxes and fees all over the place, and these utility charges that are too high so they can transfer money into the city treasury. It's all about paying CalPERS. It's all about pensions. It's not a good situation, but it might get better. If the court throws out the California rule, it might get better.
Thank you, Susan. You know, coming out, you drove a long way to come out and join us here today, and we really appreciate that. Conference on
She is
September 8th.
little, but is she ever mighty? Woo! I will stay out of your way, young lady.